If you want to make your way to the Klamath River, and more specifically Klamath Falls, Oregon, I would recommend getting yourself to the J.R. Davis Rail Yard in horrible Roseville, California. As we all know, this is one of the largest rail yards in America, so it can seem a little intimidating. But don't worry, they're just trains. Even babies play with trains, so they can't be that bad, right? Anyway, once you've made your way to the yard, you'll need to head on over to the departure yard. Walk through the big grass field that's strewn with broken glass and old refrigerators and car parks. Follow the fence until you find a hole. Wait until it's dark, stay out of sight, be quiet, be cool. And with a little luck and some gumption, you can make your way inside the rail yard without being seen. Now you're going to want to look for manifest trains with plenty of empty lumber racks. If you find any of those, there's a good chance they'll be heading north to the promised land of slippery fish and cool water. I'm talking about the Klamath River, baby. So now that you've found a mixed freight train with lots of empty lumber racks, find something comfortable like an open box car or a grainer with a porch. Wait until the coast is clear and then get up in there and stay out of sight. I hope you like waiting because freight trains don't run on schedules. If you're lucky, your train will pull out of the yard within the next 8 hours. Just get comfortable and take a nap if you can. If you can't, just spend your time thinking about how nice it'll be when you finally get to the Klamath so you can jump in and wash your soon-to-be filth-caked body in the icy water. Let's say that you get lucky and you don't have to wait 2 days for your train to pull. Let's say that you get even luckier and you correctly guess that your train was heading north. You'll know this is the case when the train leaves the yard and goes under the Rainbow Bridge. Now you're on your way, but don't get too excited. You're riding a junk train, so you've got really low priority, which means you'll be stopping to let pretty much every other train pass you by. Deal with it. It's a free ride, you baby. Plus, you'll get to see some great views on the way. You'll get to go through a bunch of cool tunnels, and you'll see Mount Shasta, and you'll go through a cool town called Weed. If your train happens to stop in the middle of nowhere, feel free to get off and have a look around. Enjoy nature. Poop on the tracks. You should follow the Sacramento River for quite a good part of the trip. But forget about that. We're here for the Klamath. And if everything goes as planned, you should be there about 24 hours after leaving Roseville. You'll know you're there after going through a bunch of flat farmland that smells like sweet, freshly mown grass. And then you'll go into a train yard and hopefully the train will stop and you'll hop off and sneak out of there. There are 2 train yards in Klamath Falls, but you probably got on a Union Pacific train in Roseville, so you'll get off in the Union Pacific yard in Cave Falls. I don't know though. You never know for sure where trains are going. Just be thankful you made it there without losing a limb. Finally, figure out how to get out of the train yard without being seen, and then find a road with plenty of traffic and stick out your thumb. If somebody stops, ask them where you are just to be sure you got out in the right city and state. Then ask them if they'll take you to the river. If they say no, just do this over and over until somebody agrees to take you. Now you've made it. Now you're in the Klamath River, scaring away all the fish as you scrub your filthy body with a handful of grass.
All right. Welcome back to the Secret Society of Fly Tires, Episode 7. In my head, this episode marks the second chapter in the first season of this program. Do seasons have chapters? It doesn't matter. All I'm saying is the first 6 episodes each highlighted a fly pattern. With the next set, I'll be using each episode to wade deep into the history of specific fisheries, what to tie if you plan to fish them, and I'll interview someone that knows more than I do about the place. First location on the list, the Klamath River. A river I haven't had the chance to fish yet, but one that's been high on my list for a few years. I'm already off to a bad start. I've made it painfully clear, and even told you outright in my initial episodes, that I am not a fly tying or fly fishing expert, and I've never been to this place. You're about to listen to a podcast about the Klamath River from a glorified novice who has never even wet a line in its waters. Calm down, it's okay. I interviewed Jason Hartwick for this episode, and I Google stuff pretty good. And I will go to the Klamath. I'm hopeful that trip will happen soon. Researching this episode felt like preparing for my inevitable trip to the Klamath, and I really enjoy getting ready for a fish mission. I love to tie flies with the purpose of using them at a specific place at a specific time, and I want to absorb information that will make my trip more enjoyable. Before a fishing trip, I like to find out if I'll be near or passing by any historic sites. There's always something worth checking out. I've grown to like historical signage and memorial markers, alright?
Well, after a long day and covering a lot of territory here in the state of Jefferson, look where we are staying tonight, the Klamath River. It's an absolutely spectacular setting. What an absolutely spectacular
setting here.
I make sure to do a food check also. Good meals are even better after a long day on the water, and I really love Mexican food, so if there's been a good burrito reported nearby, I'm getting one. Maybe I'll get bored of the fly tying topic altogether, and season 2 of this podcast will be called The Secret Society of Ceviche Enjoyers. I can see the merch in my head now, actually. I'll put the Ceviche Enjoyers shirt up in my store right next to the branded raccoon hunting helmet lamp turned fly tying UV light I concepted with Alvin Dido in the last episode. I also like checking my fishing zones for any weird attractions. You know, places like the Mystery Spot in Santa Cruz or the Thing in El Paso. I might over-prepare, and I might use my preparation powers in the wrong areas sometimes, but that's how I do things. If I was fishing near Mount Shasta, why wouldn't I spend hours trying to find a Zendra that Mission Rama reported witnessing a being named Antrel cross through?
They have an encounter with a being up on the mountain. They have a bunch of people who have this meditation experience going inside a door. They get a message about a door that's at Mount Shasta, and it actually looks like a door.
I don't know who this Antrel person is, and I've never heard of a Zendra, but let's go, I guess? Maybe I over-prepare because I tend to get myself into situations where I'm over my head. As soon as I got the steelhead bug, I booked a trip with my Uncle Mike to the Olympic Peninsula and went hunting for the largest wild steelhead I could find before I even knew what to do with one. I had barely gotten comfortable casting a fly rod, but I wanted to dive in head first. So here I go again, head first, this time into the Klamath River. To save myself from drowning so early, here's some history from AmericanRivers.org. The Klamath River flows from a broad patchwork of lakes and marshes at the foot of the Cascade Mountains on the California-Oregon border and winds southwest into California. After passing through 5 hydropower dams, the river reaches the Pacific Ocean south of the fishing community of Crescent City. I'll stop right there to mark the first weirdness stop of the trip because you may want to visit the reportedly haunted McNulty house in Crescent City. Lillian McNulty outlived her husband, and when she passed away in 1957, she left instructions that the house should be converted into a library or museum. Her wishes were respected for a few decades, but eventually after visitations started to drop, it was transitioned back to a private home and sold to a family. That family moved in and immediately began reporting strange happenings like faucets turning on by themselves. If you were raised in drought-plagued Northern California, like me, the idea of our precious water being wasted by a ghost should be fucking terrifying. In fact, I already called the police on the ghost of old lady McNulty, and I hope they lock her up for life. Okay, maybe that's not the most exciting detour on this podcast fantasy trip to the Klamath. Let's continue. The river has been home to indigenous people for thousands of years, and tribes including the Yurok, Carrick, Hoopa, Shasta, and Klamath rely on and care for the river today. I already shoehorned some Shasta weirdness into the episode a couple minutes ago, and I was turned on to that story from paranormal researcher Grant Cameron. He's got a book all about it. It's a strange one, and unless you can vibrate pure positivity and love through telepathy and group meditation, you might want to just read about it instead of camping on the side of a mountain waiting for something to happen. Go to the Shasta Inn instead. A pleasant surprise of a fishing lodge with food and full bar that has lots of good water in reach. For nearly 100 years, dams on the Klamath have blocked salmon and steelhead from reaching hundreds of miles of habitat and have harmed water quality for people and wildlife. 4 dams, J.C. Boyle, Copco No. 1, Copco No. 2, and Iron Gate, built between 1908 and 1962, will soon be coming down. This river restoration project will have lasting benefits for the river, salmon, and communities throughout the Klamath Basin. An article on flyfisherman.com said, "The mighty Klamath is possibly the best river in the lower 48 for fly fishing for steelhead and salmon. It supports good runs of Chinook salmon with 100,000 to 200,000 fish returning most years. Roughly half the Chinooks are bound for the tributary Trinity River and come in early to mid-September. The other half enter the river in mid-August and head for the middle Klamath upstream of the confluence with the Trinity and downstream from Iron Gate Dam. Did you know that this whole zone happens to be a Sasquatch highway just as much as it is an anadromous fish highway? Brave anglers might want to wander through the Marble Mountain Wilderness near Etna, California to sleep alone in Bigfoot Cave. No, don't do that. It's probably named that for a reason. Dottie's looks like my kind of drive-in though, so I'll stop in for a burger and tell everyone back home I was squatching. Preceding these Chinook salmon runs are half-pounder steelhead. Half-pounders are a special niche of steelheading and a biological anomaly that exists only in Northern California and Southern Oregon. The ecoangler.com broke it down well. A somewhat unique steelhead life history plays out in two Pacific Coast rivers, the Klamath and Rogue River. Commonly called half-pounders, these immature steelhead return to fresh water after roughly 4 months in salt water. The smaller steelhead that migrate back after one season go on to spend the winter in fresh water in search of food. Their migration contrasts with most other steelhead who spend 1 or 2 years in the ocean before returning. So why do some immature steelhead go on a migration of 4 months in salt while others don't? It turns out a steelhead's size at the end of its freshwater rearing plays a big factor in whether to undergo the half-pounder migration. Based on research, smaller than average steelhead smolts were more likely to undergo the half-pounder migration compared to those that were not. The half-pounder life history may be a strategy to increase the chance of survival by overwintering in freshwater habitats instead of the ocean, i.e., not as many hungry predators to avoid. Cool. The Klamath River is open year-round to fishing most years, but the timing of the steelhead runs means that certain times of year will be more productive than others.
So they all come out here and fish.
See? Now you know everything about the Klamath River. You're a certified expert just like me. I'll talk to my guest Jason Hartwick about the seasons and how they affect what you should tie when heading out to fish. I'll make sure to ask him about some of his signature fly patterns too, as he has many years of experience on the Klamath and the Trinity. Those rivers and conditions found in the area have influenced his tying and those signature patterns. And we'll also chat about some other Klamath-related things, including a documentary he's been helping with about the pending removal of the 4 dams mentioned earlier. Jason is the owner and head guide for Steelhead on the Spey Guide Service. Born in Sacramento, just like this podcast, he caught his first steelhead on my home river, the Lower American. He's a licensed USCG captain, a contracted fly tyer for Aquaflies, and on the CF Berkheimer Pro staff. For the last 7+ years, Jason's partnered up with other anglers like Rich Zellman, Scott Howell, and Whitney Gould to offer up the Jefferson Spey Sessions, a spey school designed for anglers of all levels on the Klamath. I've been wanting to pick his brain ever since our mutual friend J.D. Ritchie told me I needed to fish with him when I got into two-handed rods. Unfortunately, that hasn't lined up yet, but we were able to find time to meet virtually for an hour. Here's our chat. Jason, thanks for joining me. You know, I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. Your reputation, you're kind of known as a bit of a Jedi when it comes to the Klamath and the Trinity too, and you know I'm sure others. But when the Klamath came up as a topic for the show, your name was top of the list. Thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here.
Before we get into talk specifically about the Klamath, I just wanted to find out a couple things. Like, how did you get into fly tying, and how did it lead to you becoming part of the Aquaflies team?
So I started fly tying, if I had to guess, probably somewhere around 18 years old. I've been fly fishing since I was 12 or 13, just buying flies at shops, and, was around enough that tied flies, and just thought it was really cool that people tied their own flies and caught fish on them. And it didn't seem like it was that hard. So, Andy Giebord at Keeney's Fly Shop, who I actually have worked with.
Right on, yeah. I know
did
Andy.
a little intro fly tying class that I took at 18 years old, and, learned how to tie a willy bugger, a pheasant tail, you're just elk hair caddis, standard trout flies. And, kind of started from there, and got way into it when it came to tying steelhead flies. Yeah. I did the trout thing for a little while, but when I really got heavily into steelhead fishing, it was oh, wow, this is really cool. They're much more interesting flies, way more fun to tie, and they're not super tiny and hard to tie.
Yeah, so, totally.
I cut my teeth, just tying, streamers and elk hair caddis fishing on the American River as a kid for half pounders and little summer steelhead. And that kind of transitioned into tying flies for the Klamath and the Trinity, summer steelhead flies when I'd come up and spend time up north here.
Nice, man. Yeah, I know Andy. I took my first two-handed casting lesson from Andy. He's a great dude, and I hope to have him on the show one of these days. Really interview him too. That's cool. I fish the American often, and I was out there looking for shad just the other day. I think I read you caught your first steelhead on the American, yeah?
Yeah, my first steelhead I caught on the American fishing for shad. Gosh, probably like in like late May or early June down near Paradise Beach.
Too
Just
cool.
swung like little shad darts, and landed like a 6-pound,
Oh, man.
I guess summer steelhead. And I was like, wow, this is an eye opener. These things fight way harder than shad and trout and anything else I'd really caught on a fly rod. And that was kind of like the end of it.
Too cool, man. Too cool. So you're a field tester too, right? For aquaflies?
Yeah. So I've been tying for aquaflies kind of since their inception. Doug Brudico, who's one of the main guys and owners of the company, is a good friend of mine from Santa Rosa and probably one of the fishiest salmon and steelhead fishermen in the state. And at the time I was tying for Idlewild flies back many years ago, out of Portland, Oregon. And Idlewild had a really cool thing going, and it kind of like fell apart a little bit and really wasn't like tying for anybody. And Doug was starting aquaflies and wanted to do some of my patterns. So kind of went the direction of aquaflies and have been very, very pleased. They're some of the best tied steelhead flies on the market. A lot of love and care goes into the people that tie the flies and the people developing them. So I've been very pleased, and it's nice to just like be able to tie and help out a friend of mine too, who's got a pretty good business going.
Yeah, man, that's cool. So with the field testing part, what does that really boil down to? Like, what is like when you're tasked to field test a fly or a group of flies or something like that? Like, what do you do?
Well, I guess as anybody who's like a commercial fly tyer, pretty much is like field testing their own flies. Basically, when we come up with patterns, I take them to the river, fish them, sometimes having my clients fish prototype style flies and, seeing how they work, how they ride in the current, depth, the profile, just kind of everything about how they fish and, tweaking patterns every night when you get off the river to, like, oh, I want less hackle on that. Or, maybe I'm going to try a little different style hook and maybe the fly will ride better. Maybe I'm going to bend the hook a little bit to get it to, the point to sit down a little bit more, but just kind of tweaking flies as you're experimenting with them. And so like, I'd say most everybody who's tying commercially is doing that. And before they submit their flies to, the companies that are tying them, yeah, that's kind of like what we do. And then, testing flies for aqua flies, like Doug will get new patterns from other fly tyers throughout the Pacific Northwest or even around the world. And, like he'll send me a couple and say, hey, like you're on the water every day, try these, let me know what you think. And it kind of evolves from there. Doug's pretty picky about the flies he brings into the catalog, and most of the tires for aquaflies are very accomplished fly tires. And so there's not a lot of tweaking involved, I would say, but just more like how they swim and the profile, and making sure a good product is being put out there for the consumers.
Yeah, small little adjustments that you can. Yeah, I hear you. It sounds fun. You're out there testing, your signature patterns, some other folks' patterns too, I'm sure. Can you give us like a rundown of the signature patterns that you have up on aquaflies, or is that the only place that you're selling them? Yeah.
So all my flies are done through aquaflies. Gosh, I'll do my best to list all the patterns.
You don't have to list them all. Just give me a few.
But like the tube fly patterns I have mostly designed for like Chinook salmon, winter steelhead. There's like the Hartwick's hoser, the flash tail tube fly, like what we call a simple marabou tube, which is basically just a variation of a standard marabou tube fly that's been around forever. That has a little bit more profile. I think we've got one called a Cyclops leech. And then for like summer, fall steelhead patterns, the red rumbug is a new one this year. The silent assassin, the October Hilton. The sword fighter. I'm probably skinny Spratley. There's one called a duck turd. Quite a few, Klamath Trinity style patterns. I'm sure there's a few more that I'm leaving off the list, but those are kind of the main ones. And they're patterns I've been fishing on the Klamath and the Trinity rivers for a long time. Like, I really haven't come up with a ton of new patterns recently just because I've been so busy with other things going on. But very traditional, hair wing, soft hackle style flies that are kind of have like buggy appeal and not a lot of like bling or flash to them, like very natural colors, which is kind of what our summer steelhead really like in California.
Nice. Yeah, I'll make sure to link to this stuff in the show notes so people can check them out and maybe provide some videos of ties if I can find some too. Just to step back for a second with the field testing, like how do you know when a pattern is legit as opposed to just like getting lucky and catching some fish? Like when do you know it's like in the right spot for sure?
Well, that's a good question because like a lot of times I think steelhead will literally take just about anything. When it comes to like swinging flies for steelhead, like we're finding the most aggressive fish in the river that like, I mean, I've messed around with it by just tying like yarn on a hook and like they'll eat that.
Yeah.
But like when it comes to like testing flies and having like high confidence in them, I'd say like, you catch a fish on a fly one time, you're like, oh, cool, that like worked, and then it's like 2 or 3, 4 more times after that, like fairly consistently, you're like, okay, there's something to this pattern that like is getting their attention. Like, is it the way it rides in the water column? Is it the profile? Is it the color combination? But I'd say after you've consistently found like a handful of fish on a pattern, that's when I'm kind of like, okay, this thing is like going in the working box consistently.
Nice. So which of those signature flies would you say are your most geared towards the Klamath?
I'd say the couple of patterns that I are definitely like go-tos on an everyday basis from like late summer through early fall on the Klamath River would be the red rumbug, the silent assassin, and then probably like the duck turd, which is a very drab kind of peacock-bodied fly. All three of those are actually peacock-bodied flies that are kind of my go-tos for the Klamath. They're not big. They're typically like a size 8, 6 to an 8, but I kind of tie a lot of my stuff like low water style, so I'm not using the entire hook. But those are definitely my go-to like subsurface, right near the surface, like floating line flies for half pounders and steelhead on the Klamath.
Nice. Yeah. I'll put some details about those ones specifically in the show notes too. Familiar with a few of them already just from looking up videos of yours. So that's cool. Super cool. I want to ask you a little bit kind of specifically too. I mean, we might as well get into the Klamath, and which is, what the focus of this episode's about. You're from Sacramento. It's not exactly a quick trip up to the Klamath. It's not far, but what was it specifically that drew you up there and kind of like, I don't know, it feels like it's kind of your home water now.
Yeah. Well, I kind of started spending more time on the Trinity River, like late teenage, like kind of junior, senior year of high school. I was spending a lot of time on the Trinity, partially because some really good friends of mine were from Weaverville. And so we'd go up and swing flies, October for summer, fall steelhead. And I just remember spending some time down in like Willow Creek and Hoopa one year and thinking like, wow, this part of the river is really cool. It's big, it's broad, it's got great tail outs. And like, what's it like down on the lower Klamath, down around Wichipec, even lower down? Because I was into that's when I started spay fishing. And bigger water just seemed really cool, and ventured kind of down into the Wichipec area. And like, I think my first evening with a buddy of mine, like we hooked, half a dozen half pounders and a couple adult steelhead and just fishing floating lines and like didn't see another person. And I was like, this is really cool. And this was like late 90s, early 2000s, probably late 90s. And yeah, like I had heard stories about it from, working for Bill Keeney and Joe Shearshack at Keeney's, who just passed away. And Noe Fieros and all those guys were really big into going to the Klamath River not just for the half pounders, but like for like you're kind of in the mid, in like the wild, wild west part of California. There's like not many people around. There's amazing water, beautiful scenery, and quite a few fish.
Yeah, every time I go into Keeney's, and we're talking steelhead, that's where they direct me, and so I've been fly fishing for about 10 years and doing the two-handed stuff for probably about 3. And so my interest has peaked. I haven't been to the Klamath yet, to be totally honest. And it's peaked recently. And now with, the dam removal stuff happening, it's getting even more interesting. And so, yeah, I can't wait to get up there. Like, how long did it take till you felt like you knew that river intimately?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, like, I definitely focused on certain stretches of the Klamath. Like I've fished it top to bottom, but like I definitely spent a lot more time from like mid-river, Happy Camp area down to the mouth. And it took a couple of years to feel really comfortable, like with knowing where to go, what kind of flies to fish, what times of year the fish are in certain parts of the river. But, after a few years of spending a lot of time on it, I felt like extremely confident in it. And I definitely spent a lot more time guiding the Trinity because there was just more demand for it. And a lot of people were coming out of the Bay Area, Central Valley. It's easily accessible. The runs of fish were really good for quite some period of time. And so the demand was just higher for the Trinity, which is why I spent more time guiding on it. But then as like the numbers started to kind of like go down a little bit in the Trinity and more people started showing up, is when I started venturing over to the Klamath, especially with like really good clients of mine. Mm-hmm. And just like, hey, well, you got to come check this out. Like, you're not going to catch a bunch of big fish, but you're going to catch quite a few half pounders. And the adult steelhead we do catch are like some of the hardest fighting fish pound for pound, like you'll find. Like, you'll catch 2 and 3 pound fish that will literally rip you into your backing in a heartbeat, where you don't see that in the Trinity just because of the size of the river. And the fish have worked their way through a lot of like class 4 and 5 whitewater to get up to where they slow down. So you're catching fish on the Klamath that aren't working very hard in the lower 40, 50 miles of river because it's so low gradient, and not a lot of pressure in that stretch. And so they're very aggressive, grabby fish. And the other thing that just really got my attention is how good of a floating line fishery it is. Like, the entire fall, like, you can catch fish from August all the way to December on floating lines. And there's not a lot of rivers, throughout the country that you can kind of do that even when the water gets really cold, and the Klamath's still that way.
You were talking about seasons. We started kind of dipping into that. Like, would you mind, without giving up, all your secrets, like kind of running down like what works, season to season there, like, and you were talking about different parts of the river. Maybe you can, say, the lower section is, where you want to kind of look at for certain seasons, or kind of go into it a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Klamath's basically from the mouth up to Iron Gate Dam is over 100 miles. And most people kind of break the Klamath into like 3 sections of river, like the upper river, the middle river, the lower river. Most of the guiding I do on the Klamath is in the mid to lower river. And I'll kind of break it up from like low up to the higher part. But basically the lower Klamath, we kind of talk about from like the mouth of the river in Requa up to about the Wichipec area where the Trinity River dumps in. And that's about 42 miles of river. And honestly, you can catch steelhead in that stretch of river every month of the year. There's fresh steelhead in the lower Klamath every month of the year. There's certain times of the year that there's way more steelhead around. But I'd say most of the time I spend on the lower Klamath, typically like mid-August to about mid-October on the lower river. It's primarily a jet boat fishery, swinging, spay rods, floating lines 90% of the time. And you'll catch half pounders and adults, summer, fall run steelhead from, mid-August to mid-October. And then typically the middle stretch of river, basically from like Wichipec up to like Happy Camp area, is what I'd classify as like the middle river. And fish will be in that stretch from like late September all the way, into Christmas time. I focus up there a little bit more like October. but there are fish through that whole time period. And it's the same style of fishery. It's floating line fishing. Later in the year, you can get into some more sink tip fishing because the water temps drop a little bit. And then the upper river from like Happy Camp up to Iron Gate Dam seems to fish a lot better from like late October all the way through, like December, January. I don't spend much time up there just because it gets too far away from home. Mm-hmm. And by the time a good number of fish get up that way, it becomes more of a sink tip fishery. And so I don't fish it a lot anymore. I used to. I love it. It's a great stretch of river, but it's a little bit smaller and is starting to see a little bit more pressure than the mid to lower reaches.
Thanks for that. Let's talk a little bit about this documentary project you're working on, since we're talking, about the river now. How long have you been working on this, and can you give us a little bit of info on the project?
Yeah, so a good friend of mine, Shane Anderson, North Fork Studios, he's been making documentaries mostly on like rivers, fish, forestry for 6-7 years now. And we did a project on the Eel River together called A River's Last Chance 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And as that was kind of winding down, there was a lot more talk about what was going on in the Klamath, the potential of the dams coming down. And about 2 years ago now, there was a bid through KRRC, which is the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, which is basically taking over the license transfer for the dam removal from Pacific Corp. And they basically had a bid to do a documentary for all the signatories of the KRRC, which includes American Rivers, Cal Trout, Trout Unlimited, the Karuk tribe, the Yurok tribe. There's probably a few more I'm leaving out, but basically there's a bid for that project, and we put a bid in for the documentary project, which is slated over 5 to 6 years. So it's not like a documentary project that you're just going and shooting a year's worth of footage and coming up with a film. This is like talking about like what's been going on, with the Karuk, the Yurok tribes, the Upper Basin tribes, the work that they're doing with Pacific Corp, the work that Trout Unlimited and Cal Trout have done, and basically what everybody's done to make this dam removal process happen. And so we're right now in the process of interviewing everybody involved. Like we just finished up interviewing Frankie Joe Myers, who's the vice chair for the Yurok tribe, Leif Hillman, who used to be the chairman of the Karuk tribe, who really helped spur the dam removal process and get it going a number of years ago. Craig Tucker, who is kind of a spokesperson for all the tribes in the area, and just really kind of starting to get going on the project, starting now for the next 5 years or however long it takes to really get the dams out. And we don't anticipate being done with the documentary until we get footage of that first salmon going up past J.C. Boyle Dam.
Oh man, that's gonna be a big day, right?
So, it's, even though the dam removals aren't happening just yet, like a lot of things are taking place. They're working on how they're going to do the habitat restoration above the dams, how they're going to implement spring Chinook into the system. We're kind of just waiting for the final FERC approval on the dam removal process, which we hopefully should know exactly the dates by no later than December, from what I'm being told.
That's what I was going to ask next. So it's J.C. Boyle, Copco number 1 and 2, and Iron Gate that are all coming down, right? I was doing some reading about this.
Correct. Yeah. So it's the lower 4 dams on the Klamath, and it was slated to be, removed starting in 2022, and then it was pushed back to 2023. And there was still hope that things were going to get started this year, but because believe the EIS survey kind of got pushed back a little bit, that we're kind of on hold to potentially get pushed into 2024. That if things kind of go at the pace they're going right now, I would anticipate 2024 being the year that JC Boyle, Copco, and Iron Gate are going to be removed. The Copco diversion potentially could be start removal next summer if everything is on track.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like such a. I mean, obviously, it's not a small project, and there's tons of information. I think the whole plan's online in PDF if anybody wanted to read it. I mean, I think it's like a hefty read too, because I was going through it. But yeah, I was going to ask if it's on track, right? And it sounds like, I mean, these things like this are probably really tough to keep on track, but it sounds like it's at least moving in like a positive direction.
Yeah, it's definitely, I really believe it's going to happen. I think it's probably going to be more like 2024, which means they'll start some of the processes next summer. Like the Copco diversion could come out next July or August, a year from now. And then they would start working on draining the reservoirs and deconstruction of some of the other dams for a blast in January of 2024 is kind of what the talk is right now. And from what I know, it would be doing a blast of Copco and JC Boyle at the exact same time on the same day, and then opening up the bottom gate at Iron Gate to flush out all the water and sediment as that happens. And then they would start, chipping away at Iron Gate after, we're back to kind of a flowing river above there.
Yeah, man, I have so many like logistical questions. Your role in this is videography, right? You're a videographer on the project?
Yeah. So basically, the group I work for is actually, I guess it'd be Swiftwater Films is our LLC for this project. And Shane Anderson's kind of like the head of it. And then we basically subcontract out a lot of work amongst different people that we work with. And yeah, I fly some drone stuff. I shoot time lapses for the project. And then also, like B-roll, footage on the project.
That's rad. Like I can only imagine like the scale of having to put together shots for the blast days on those, especially if two are coming down at once. Sounds like a fun day. Yeah,
it'll be really exciting when it happens. Like I feel like it's gonna happen, but until I actually like hear the blast or get to see it through the camera lens, is when it'll really set in.
So there'll be a period of time when the river's closed to fishing, right?
That I'm not 100% sure on. They probably will do that above the dam sites, like above Iron Gate, but I wouldn't anticipate anything changing from Iron Gate down. I haven't heard of anything like that, but in this process, there's so much to figure out and to know about and what they're doing that it's kind of hard to stay on top of it.
Yeah, I hear you. So with the videography stuff, did fly fishing bring you into that, or was it the other way around? Like, were you interested in photography and stuff first?
Well, I've always kind of been big into photography and just wanting to shoot photos of the rivers I'm on and while I'm guiding, fishing, all these beautiful places. And basically, I kind of got into the videography thing, like when I worked with Shane on A River's Last Chance on the eel, and kind of, just slowly kind of got into it. And mostly I'm just doing work for his production company. I shoot a few other things on my own time, but I probably spend a lot more time doing time-lapse photography and just standard still photography than anything else.
Yeah, I only see what you post on Instagram, and that stuff's great. I mean, it looks awesome. I'll make sure to link to that in the show notes too. You have and I have a photographer for sure. I thought I had a couple more questions here about the documentary. Was there anything else you wanted to add about it? You have a name for it, or when it's you said it probably won't be coming out for 4 or 5 years or so, right?
Yeah, it'll probably be at least 4 or 5 years is my guess. I don't know if we've settled on a final name. It might be called Undamming Klamath. I don't think that's completely set in stone yet. We started filming some stuff last year, and this summer we're really getting into like shooting a lot more. Like we did a bunch of interviews 2 weeks ago, mostly with tribal members of the Yurok and Karuk and Hoopa tribes. And I think we've got a segment we're going to shoot with Rez this summer, who's in charge of all the habitat restoration above the dams. And we'll shoot the salmon festival the Yurok tribe puts on in August. Probably shoot, some stuff for the salmon migration this fall. So it's kind of really starting to happen now. And we'll build into, the dams hopefully getting blown up in 2024.
Right on. It's a hot topic right now. If you're looking online, reading about Northern California fishing, top of the list. Everybody's talking about it. So everybody's excited. And speaking as someone who's never been there yet, I'm dying to get up there, and I'm planning to get up there before all that stuff happens. And I'm looking forward to seeing the before and after.
Yeah, it's good. It should be amazing. I mean, just with all the success stories of other dam removals around the country, especially the Elwha, just knowing what potentially could happen with the river and how quickly, I think summer steelhead will really, and fall steelhead even in general, will gain traction in the upper basin, and it should only help the salmon numbers in the future.
Speaking of bringing rivers back into shape, what do you think could be done to bring the Lower American River back into shape?
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. I don't know if there's really a lot that can be done, just given that it flows through, Sacramento, and it's the river's dammed. I mean, I can only imagine what the steelhead runs and salmon runs were like on the American pre-dams. I mean, with all the habitat above Folsom Lake, Auburn, those areas. Probably consistent water flows. It sounds like, I think in the droughts right now, a lot of our rivers are suffering from being dewatered, too warm of water, toxic algae blooms. It's not just something the Americans experiencing, but we're experiencing on the Klamath, Eel, the Trinity, the Rogue. I mean, there aren't too many rivers, up and down the West Coast right now that aren't dealing with climate change, warmer water conditions, less water. And I think that's, having a big impact on salmon and steelhead returns everywhere.
Yeah. It's for someone who's only been fishing, the American for about 10 years. All I hear is the stories, right, of how good it was at one point. And really what kind of got me stoked on it was I was fishing down near Sailor Bar, right when I started fishing. A guy came tromping down the river with one on, and I took the picture for him, and he got at least a 10-pound steely on a little soft tackle, and it just blew me up. I'm like, oh man, those things are here. And so I live right by it. I'm in Carmichael, and I fish it at least once a week, get out there, whatever's going on if I can. And, I would love for it to somehow, be rejuvenated. They do little Band-Aid projects like salmon restoration stuff that seem to help short-term. But it's, you're right. I think there's not a whole lot that can be done with a river that's going through a metro area like that,
Yeah. I mean, I think right now, though, the one thing on the West Coast with salmon and steelhead is the places that have climate refuge and have cold water that come into them and see snow melt and just consistently a little bit more cold water than most places, I think are the rivers that have really a chance to come back. And I think what's so important about what's going on right now in the North Coast here with the Klamath dams coming out and then the potential of the Eel River dams coming out here in the near future is basically getting cold water from the upper basins down into the main stretches of those rivers. And, you've got spring creeks that run out of the upper Klamath basin, and that's cold water. But by the time it gets into all those lakes, Klamath Lake, Keno Lake, JC Boyle, Copco, Iron Gate, that water warms up significantly and produces less oxygen, and it makes it harder for fish to thrive and creates algae blooms and aquatic disease that are impacting our fish. And it's that way in a lot of places. You've heard a lot more about it in the Klamath since the fish kill in 2002.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that that I heard, one of the ways I heard about you first was the Jefferson Space Sessions. I haven't attended. I hope to someday. Are they happening in 2022?
Yeah. So we've done the Jefferson Space Sessions. I think this will be our 7th or 8th year now. And basically they're space casting schools. We host on the Klamath River. For anybody, it's not just a spay casting school. I mean, we're fishing every day, but the focus is on becoming a better steelhead angler using two-handed rods. And so we focus on all the casts, the difference between fishing floating lines versus Skagit lines, fly choice, water type, kind of breaking down all of like steelhead fishing for summer and fall run steelhead. And they've been great. Just like the Klamath, you get feedback a lot of the time. Like there's half pounders around, there's plenty of adult summer steelhead and fall fish. And so it's a great place for people that don't have a lot of experience or no experience to like learn how to cast and catch fish at the same time. And we're very fortunate. We have a great location up at Sandy Bar Ranch that we've been hosting the sessions up there for a number of years and sell them out every year. We're sold out for this year as well already.
Cool.
So yeah, we always look forward to that. It's a good time and meet lots of new excited anglers.
Yeah, man, it seems super cool. Like you said, not just casting practice and instruction, but some catching practice and stuff like that too, which is important too. Who's up there with you this year? Is it Whitney Gould again?
No, so Whitney hasn't done it for a few years now. She's guiding in Montana on the Missouri River. So for now it's myself, Rich Zellman. Rich and I kind of started the Jefferson Space Sessions together. And then Scott Howell, who's out of the Medford, Oregon area. Scott helps us with the sessions as well. And Scott is kind of born and raised fishing the Rogue and the Klamath rivers. And so it's been fun having Scott down because he hadn't spent a lot of time on the Klamath until the last couple of years. And it was funny last year, every day off in between the schools or the sessions, I should say, Scott is out there fishing and just having a blast. And
hell yeah.
So, it's a good group of people. We anticipate keep doing it every year. It's one of those things like we feel like one of these years they're not going to fill up, but they always do. And I think as the dam removal happens and more people like start hearing what's going on in the Klamath, we're going to start seeing like more people down this way fishing. So it's good for business. It's good for the river, good for the local economies.
Yeah, it seems like something that you almost don't have to advertise that much because I don't see a whole lot about it. Like I didn't know that it was happening this year and that it was sold out. That's for sure.
Yeah, we didn't advertise. We haven't really advertised it much the last few years because we've actually had so many people contact us before we put it out there. And then like we've had people rebook for the next year and we've had referrals. And so like, it's one of those things we haven't really advertised it like we probably should, but if like a week opens up or people drop out of spots, like we would probably advertise it a little bit more, but it's one of those things like we could do even more of them. I think right now we're doing 4 sessions this year and like, we could do more of them, but it's like the perfect amount to like really be in that stretch of river for like a month period.
Cool. Yeah. These are like 3-day classes.
Yeah. They're 3-day schools. People show up on a Thursday night. We fish like, for example, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then they head home. So it's like 3 full days of fishing. Yeah. We do a little fly tying in the evenings, tie some of our favorite like Klamath River patterns. So it's kind of a do everything in learning to steelhead fish, like fly tying, casting, line choice, flies. It's a great way for people that like want to really get dialed into steelhead fishing to kind of like break it down in a 3 or 4 day period.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables. It's awesome. It definitely sounds like a master class, especially with the people you have there. The group sounds awesome. I need to get up there. I'm going to try to get up there 2023, man. What kind of encouragement would you give someone to give like two-handed casting a shot. It seems like a whole new skill set and knowledge base until you try it. Even if you're already fly fishing with a single hand rod.
Yeah. So one, I would say it is not anything close to single hand fly casting. I have clients that are extremely good single hand anglers that you give them the two-handed rod and teach them how to cast it, and they just struggle. There's a lot with it. I mean, it's very easy to learn. It takes some time to master, but like, it's not the same as casting a single-handed fly rod. It's a water-loaded cast. I think one of the big myths about it is that like people want to do it because they think they can cast so much further. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think a good angler I know I can cast a single-handed fly rod as far as a spey rod, like no question. What it allows you to do when targeting steelhead swinging flies is to like really cover the water well in less amount of time. You can fish in places you normally can't fish with a single-handed rod. And it also allows us to really target winter steelhead with heavy sink tips and big flies, which is something that is really hard to do with a single-handed 9-foot, 7-8 weight fly rod. I think for people who haven't tried it, if you like salmon and steelhead fishing and even trout fishing nowadays, and swinging flies, like it's definitely something to try. It's not for everybody, but like you have to try it at least once and kind of give it a chance, because you're not going to master it on your first couple of times out. So like be patient and realize the more time you put into it, the better you're going to get. But I also think for somebody that wants to like really become a good steelhead angler, like your best, like learning how to spey cast and kind of getting dialed to that, because it's kind of the easiest way to target these fish swinging a fly.
Yeah, it's kind of a little less effort too, right? I mean, for fishing all day. I mean, and for me, like I fish the American all the time, right? Like I've already said, and I don't do a lot of catching on the American. So enjoying the casting is a big part of it for me too. And I just feel like the casting is so enjoyable, So going out, so your ideal day fishing, you got the day off guiding, day off from shooting film. What's your ideal like setup and place to fish? Like what do you want to do?
Oh gosh, well, that's tough. One, I probably don't fish as much as most people think. When I get days off these days, a lot of times it's getting caught up in like tying flies or running errands, preparing for the next set of trips. But when I do have some time to actually go fishing, I usually choose a like 3 to 6 hour window of when I want to go fishing. Depends on the time of the year. If it's like summer or fall period where like low light's really important, an ideal day for me would be just getting in the jet boat, running up the lower Klamath a little ways and fishing some of the shade in the canyon, and riffle hitching like a muddler minnow and skating it in a, tail out or, choppy run looking for summer run steelhead. One of my favorite things to do in the wintertime. I love winter steelhead fishing. But a lot of times if I do get a chance to fish for winter steelhead, which doesn't happen a lot, I usually go out and fish like 1 or 2 runs. And, if I find a fish, great. If I don't, like head back to the house and take it easy. But I generally won't fish all day, just because I'm on the water every day. Things are fishable working. So I don't feel like I'm necessarily missing out, but I still want to get out there and chase fish when I do have a chance.
Something about winter steelhead fishing makes you feel like you're more badass than everybody else. You're like out there in the elements, like when nobody else wants to be out there. It's super fun. But I haven't caught a steelhead skating fly yet. I really want to. I need to come up and fish with you, dude. I tried to once and it was my fault. It didn't happen. But I'm gonna make that happen one of these days. One last question that I like ending my interviews with, and it's totally not related to fly tying at all. It's I just want to find out if you've had any paranormal experiences. You spend way too much time in Bigfoot country not to know one personally at this point.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of my good clients ask me all the time about Bigfoot.
Oh yeah.
At least ones that are interested in Bigfoot, because I am up here in Bigfoot country. I spend 90% of my time on the Klamath River. And getting to know some of the Yurok Native Americans, they have stories, in over the years of Bigfoot and what they've heard or seen. I personally have not seen Bigfoot. I've had two experiences, one on the Klamath and one in the Trinity, that, to me didn't make sense. It wasn't a bear running through a campground or breaking trees behind us in the campground. But I can only think of it as possibly like Bigfoot. But we are in like the most remote stretch of California. I mean, there's so few people that live in the Klamath Basin and along that river that, like, I could easily see something being in that zone and hiding from anybody. Like, there's people that have lived up in those areas for years because they don't see people, they don't run into other people, they don't want to be found. It's an extremely remote part of this state, which is hard to imagine being in California and like not seeing a lot of people and a lot of traffic and activities kind of on the Klamath.
Yeah, Bigfoot's a funny subject. I read about this stuff a lot, and I figured you had at least some kind of story. It sounds like you had some sounds or something, like, right?
Twice now, like once on the Trinity and once or even maybe twice on the Klamath. Definitely heard some like screeching noises. Heard some like tree knocks and tree breaking. All three of these would be in different parts of the river, but also in parts where like there aren't roads and people really around too much.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that it necessarily is, but right, yeah. You try to gather what it could be. And like, I spent a lot of time around bears, be it on the Klamath. You see black bear every day. In Alaska, I've worked up there for 14 of the last 15 years and dealt with, brown bears and cubs. And there's a big difference between a cub making a screeching sound to its mom versus some of the sounds we've heard out there in the middle of nowhere. It's a totally different pitch and tone to it.
Yeah, I'm open to a lot of stuff, a lot of weird stuff. Like, I read a lot online about all different subjects, and with Bigfoot, I've gone back and forth at a lot over the years. I mean, it's cool that it's like a Northern California thing, kind of. I know it's almost, I guess you could say it's global, but the big video is a Northern California thing, right? The Patterson film, and I've kind of gone back and forth a bunch of times on whether I think it's legit or not, or whether it's some kind of missing link or ape species or something like that. Or and I think like if I had to make my own decision or opinion on it, I'm leaning more towards something like even weirder and maybe even spiritual or like interdimensional or something like that, because of the global reach on it. Like almost every ancient culture has these stories, right? Yeah. And it's not just in the Pacific Northwest, but it's all over the globe. And if it's like that and we're not ever finding real evidence for it, but there's this like overreaching, persistent mythology of it, it leads me to believe that there's a possibility for it. Not to take this interview in a totally weird area, but that's the question I asked, and I don't get a lot of answers to it, to be honest. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. Maybe when I come up there, we'll go hunting for it, dude.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks for coming on the program, man. I really appreciate you spending some time with me, breaking off some knowledge for everybody. And like I said, I'll include links to a whole bunch of this stuff in the show notes. Your other film that you mentioned, I'll link to that. Some of your fly patterns, some tie-in videos, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I try to fill that up with information so people can dig around and learn more, outside of just hearing me blab. But thanks again, man.
All right, thanks.
Cool. Have a good one.
You too.
Well, thanks to Jason, I couldn't be more stoked to finally make my way to the Klamath. This will happen soon, and I'll prove it with pictures one of these days. Hopefully, I'll find myself bettering my two-handed casting and fishing skills alongside Jason when I get up there. I could pick his brain for hours about tying and fishing, and now apparently Bigfoot too. See, someone finally had some unexplainable experiences to share. Little bit of a dry spell there ever since my first interview when Jonathan Farmer had a ghost story. All the links for things we talked about on the episode can be found in the show notes, so don't forget to check those out. And thanks for tuning in to my 7th episode. Lucky number 7, matching up with some lucky steelhead and salmon that are getting some river back with the demolition of the dams on the Klamath in the coming years. I feel lucky myself to be around to witness the restoration and positive impact it will have on species that are so important in so many ways. I'll keep the river-centric episodes going with my next episode focusing on another gem of a river, the Truckee. I'll probably do a few more of these on specific bodies of water and then move on to something else for a bit. I don't know, man. If you really knew all the things that bounced around in my brain, you'd be amazed that these podcasts get done at all. How can I get to the Klamath soon? When do I have to pick my kid up from school again? What do you mean The Wizard of Oz is an occult love letter to Helena Blavatsky? Should I have 2 corn dogs for lunch or 3 corn dogs for lunch? Why is my son perched on my shoulder like a parrot? Why is the government and the media trying to scare me all the time? Oh good, I only have 6 Zoom meetings at work today. Would it be weird if I started wearing wigs everywhere? How am I still so bad at guitar after 25 years of playing one? I miss my friend John Clemenson. How are my young children already smarter than me? Do I have enough money in my checking account to buy another tracksuit? Do I have any money in my checking account? Is there some sort of immensely important connection to all these ancient megaliths found around the globe?
Is anyone still listening to me?
And that's just a quick peek of what I'm comfortable sharing on the internet forever with strangers. If there are any fly tying topics that you'd like to hear me cover, or someone you'd like to hear me interview in the future, let me know. There are many ways to reach me through secretsocietyofFlyTires.com, and I'd love to hear from you. Goodbye. Just as a reminder, the next 2 organizations do not sponsor the podcast and have probably never heard it, but I back what they do, and I'd like to spread the word to people who may have not heard of them yet. So I'll keep reading these until they tell me to stop. Cast Hope is a nonprofit organization positively impacting kids and their mentors in California and Western Nevada through free fly fishing and outdoor experiences. Through their program, clients build mentoring relationships, fly fishing skills, outdoor knowledge, sustainable practices, and personal values. Cast Hope's gift of the outdoors empowers each mentoring pair to grow closer as they participate in healthy hobbies together. Check them out at casthope.org and whichever social network you like to use. Wild Steelheaders United was established to educate and mobilize the numerous wild steelhead advocates. It's a place where anglers can become more informed about wild steelhead biology and ecology, keep abreast of policy issues, and learn about Trout Unlimited's conservation work. As demonstrated by history, it is certainly possible to rally conservation-minded steelhead anglers to weigh in on a specific management decision that threatens to eliminate something they value. But there is no precedent for advancing a proactive, sustainable policy agenda at scale through purely volunteer efforts. Chances of conservation success are greatest if we have the backing of as many individuals as possible across all the Pacific states. This is why Wild Steelheaders United is critical. Visit wildsteelheaders.org for more info.
This episode of the Secret Society of Fly Tires is brought to you by the Secret Society of Ceviche Enjoyers, a podcast made by and for people who love gobbling down big old bags of ceviche. What's ceviche, you ask? Well, listen to the Secret Society of Ceviche Enjoyers to find out. But if you don't have time for that, I'll tell you. It's raw fish that people put juice on and pretend it's cooked. They eat it like that. Subscribe and like and be notified today and forever.